They thought they had silenced me, but the photo in my hand of Derek meeting the client is just the first domino, and I am about to topple them all. The meatloaf was drying out under the foil, and the green beans had gone from bright to that sickly olive color that happens when they sit too long. I checked the clock on the microwave again, 7:42. Leo had already eaten his portion in silence and retreated to his room with the excuse of homework. Mia picked at her food, pushing a green bean around her plate like it was a tiny enemy she was trying to wear down. "Where's Dad?" she asked, not looking up. "He had a late meeting," I said, the words automatic, practiced. "Eat your beans, sweetie." She didn't eat her beans. She just kept pushing them, and I could see the shape of my own stubbornness in the set of her jaw. She was 12 now, old enough to know a lie when she heard one, young enough to still expect the truth. I had no truth to give her. The front door opened at 8:03. I heard the familiar cadence of Mark's footsteps, the slight drag of his left foot, the heavier weight on the heel. He'd been walking like that for years, ever since he sprained his ankle playing pickup basketball with some friends from work. The limp had healed, but the habit remained. I used to find it endearing. Now I just found it predictable. "Sorry," he said, coming into the kitchen, loosening his tie. His jacket was slung over his arm, and his hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hand through it. The conference call ran long. You know how it is. I knew how it was. I knew it intimately. The conference calls that ran long, the traffic that was worse than usual, the unexpected client dinner that came up at the last minute. I had catalogued every excuse over the past 3 years, filed them away in a mental cabinet labeled things I choose not to confront. "There's still food on the stove," I said. "Plates in the cubby road." He kissed the top of Mia's head on his way to the stove. She flinched, just slightly, and I pretended not to see it. He didn't notice either. He was already pulling out a plate, serving himself a portion of the dried-out meatloaf, chattering about the meeting in a way that was designed to sound natural and rehearsed at the same time. I busied myself with wiping down the counter. It was already clean. I wiped it anyway. That's what you do when you're buying time, when you're waiting for the moment to pass so you can go back to pretending everything is fine. The text message came through at 8:15. Mark's phone was face up on the counter, next to his keys. I saw the screen light up out of the corner of my eye, just a flash of white against the dark glass. I wasn't trying to read it. I genuinely wasn't. But my eyes were drawn to movement like a moth to a flame, and the words registered before I could look away. "She doesn't suspect anything. See you tomorrow." I froze. My hand stopped mid-wipe, the rag still pressed against the granite. I read the message again, then a third time, my brain trying to find an innocent explanation. Chin. I didn't know an Chin. I knew a Karen Chin from Leo's school, but the number wasn't hers. I knew a Mr. Chin who ran the dry cleaning shop on Main, but Mark didn't handle the dry cleaning, I did. Mark reached for his phone, his fingers brushing mine as he picked it up. He glanced at the screen, and I watched his face change. It was subtle, just the rest flicker in his eyes, the almost imperceptible tightening around his mouth. But I knew his face. I'd been looking at it for 14 years. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, wiping the counter again. "Just a colleague," he said, slipping the phone into his pocket. "Work stuff. The logistics manager from the Charlotte branch. She's in town for the conference." She. The word hit me like a slap. Not they, she. The sender was a she. Chin was a she, and she was in town, and she didn't suspect anything. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the counter to still them. "Charlotte branch," I repeated. "I didn't know you had a Charlotte branch." "We don't," he said smoothly, too smoothly. We're exploring a partnership. It's new. I told you about it, remember he hadn't told me. He hadn't told me anything about a Charlotte partnership or a logistics manager or any of it. But I nodded anyway, because that's what I did. I nodded and smiled and pretended that the ground beneath my feet was solid when I could feel it rooting to crack. Mia excused herself from the table, her plate really touched. Mark watched her go, a puzzled frown on his face. She's not eating well, he said. Is she sick? She's a teenager, I said. It's normal. But it wasn't normal. It wasn't normal for her to be so quiet, so withdrawn. It wasn't normal for Leo to hide in his room with the door closed, emerging only for meals and school. It wasn't normal for this house to feel like a museum of happy memories that we were no longer allowed to touch. The argument root over the school fees. It always root over something practical, something we could quantify and measure and blame each other for. Leo needed braces. The orthodontist had given us the estimate last week, $2,000 after insurance. Mia had been accepted into the summer ARTS program at the community college, a chance to study with a visiting artist from the city. That was another $3,000. We didn't have it. I knew we didn't have it. But Mark had been withdrawing cash. I'd noticed it 3 months ago, small amounts at first, $40 here, $60 there. I'd convinced myself it was for his mother's medicine, his commute, the 1,000 small expenses that add up over time. But the amounts had grown, and the withdrawals had become more frequent. Last week, I'd seen $150 leave our joint account, Mark had simply ATM withdrawal. How can we not have it? Mark was saying, his voice rising. You're making $73,000 a year. I'm making $68. That's $141,000 combined. Where is it all going? I read at him, incredulous. Where is it going? I repeated. The mortgage is $2,000 a month. The kids' school is $900. Leo's therapy, Mia's tutors, the CAR payments, insurance, groceries. Do you want me to go through the spreadsheets? I can go through the spreadsheets. I've been going through them every single night for the past 6 months, trying to figure out why our numbers don't add up. Our numbers don't add up because you're spending too much, he said. You bought that new sofa. You bought that vase. I bought the sofa because the old one had a spring poking through that you kept cutting your leg on. I bought the vase because it was on clearance for $12 Mark. That's not why we're in trouble. I was angry now, truly angry, the kind of anger that comes from the of swallowing your voice. I could feel the heat rising to my face, the tightness in my chest. I knew I should stop. I knew we shouldn't be doing this in front of the children, even if they weren't in the room. But I couldn't stop. $40 I said. $60 $150 $400 last week alone. Where is the cash going? Mark, tell me that. Tell me where the cash is going. His face went pale. I saw it happen, saw the color drain from his cheeks like water from a sink. I told you, he said, his voice dropping to something defensive and wounded. My mother's medical bills. Your mother has Medicare. She has supplemental insurance. The last time you gave her money was Christmas, and it was $50 in a CA road. Don't lie to me. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of Leo's video game from his room. Mark stood there, his tie loose, his hair still mussed, looking at me like I was a stranger he just met in a bad neighborhood. I'm going to take a shower, he said finally. I'm tired. He left the table. His dinner was half eaten, the meatloaf congealing on the plate. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heavy and slow, and then the water running in the bathroom. The sound of the shower was like white noise, filling the house with a false sense of normalcy. I was alone in the kitchen with the dried-out meatloaf and the olive-colored green beans. I sat down in Mark's chair, still warm from his body, and I let myself feel it. The fear, the humiliation. The bone-deep exhaustion that came from years of holding everything together while the people around me took it all apart. I thought about my mother. She had been a teacher, retired now, living in a small house near the lake with her sister. She had raised my brother and me alone after our father left when I was 10. She had never remarried. She had never complained. She had just worked and saved and sacrificed, and now she spent her days tending her garden and reading mystery novels and pretending that everything had turned out exactly as she'd planned. I understood her now in a way I'd never understood her before. The way she'd held things together by sheer force of will, the way she'd swallowed her pride and her anger and her fear because there was no other choice. I understood why she'd never talked about my father, why she'd never explained what had happened or why he'd left. Some things were too painful to put into words. Some things you just ride silently until you didn't have to RRY them anymore. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dim kitchen light, and I navigated to our joint bank account. I'd checked it this morning, but I needed to see it again, to confirm what I already knew. The balance was lower than it had been yesterday. I scrolled through the transactions, looking for the familiar pattern of small withdrawals that had become a plague on our finances. And then I saw it. A withdrawal of $5,000 made this afternoon. Mark's name on the transaction. Mark's signature, captured at the bank branch downtown. Ista read at the screen. My mind raced through all the possible explanations, a mistake, a fraud, a misunderstanding. But I knew. I'd known for months. The signs had been there, and I'd chosen to ignore them because confronting them meant confronting the fact that my marriage was built on sand. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady now. I'd moved past shaking, past the wave of nausea that had threatened to consume me. I was in the cold, clear space that comes after devastation, when there's nothing left to break and all you can do is start picking up the pieces. I thought about calling Mark's mother. She was a good woman, a kind woman, and she loved her son. She would have talked to him, begged him, pleaded with him to do the right thing. But I couldn't do that to her. She was 72 years old, recovering from a hip replacement, and the last thing she needed was to know that her only son had turned into a stranger. I thought about calling my mother. But she would have been practical, matter of fact. She would have told me to leave him, to take the children and go. And she would have been right. But I wasn't ready to leave. I wasn't ready to admit that 14 years of marriage, 2 children, and a house we'd bought together had come to this. I found my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I landed on S.A. Ra's name. S.A. Ra was a friend from college, a lawyer who specialized in family law. We'd stayed in touch over the years, meeting for coffee every few months, trading stories about work and kids and the way our lives had turned out differently than we'd expected. It was 9:30 at night. Too late to call. But I called anyway, because I needed to hear a voice that wasn't Mark's, a voice that wouldn't lie to me. She answered on the second ring. Laura. Is everything okay? No, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat and hollow. No, everything is not okay. I need some advice. Legal advice. There was a pause on her end. I heard her moving somewhere, probably closing a door, leaving a room where someone else was sleeping. Talk to me, she said. What happened? I don't know how to say it, I said. I think my husband is hiding something from me. I think he's been taking money out of our joint account, and I don't know where it's going. I found a withdrawal for $5,000 this afternoon. He didn't tell me about it. He didn't even tell me he was going to the bank. Are you sure it was him? It had his signature on it. Another pause. Okay, Ross said. Her voice was calm, professional, the voice she used in court. Okay, Laura. Here's what I need you to do. First, don't confront him again tonight. Whatever you do, don't let him know you've seen the withdrawal. Second, start documenting everything. Every transaction, every conversation, every time he's late or gives you an excuse that doesn't quite add up. You need a paper trail. I have a paper trail, I said. I've been keeping track for months. I just didn't want to believe it. I know, she said. I know. But believing it is the first step. You can't fix a problem you won't acknowledge. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Thank you, I said. I'm sorry to call so late. Don't apologize. You call me whenever you need to. Day or night. That's what friends are for. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up. The shower had stopped running. I heard Mark's footsteps in the hallway, the creak of the bedroom door, the soft thud of his body hitting the bed. The house settled into its nighttime rhythms, the furnace clicking on, the refrigerator humming, the old floorboy RDS contracting as the temperature dropped. I stayed at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. The meatloaf was cold now, the green beans shriveled. I would have to throw them out in the morning. There would be no leftovers to pack for lunch, no quick meal for tomorrow night. I thought about my children. Leo, who barely spoke to me anymore, who spent his evenings in his room with his headphones on, blocking out the world. Mia, who watched me with those knowing eyes, who saw everything and said nothing. They deserved better than this. They deserved a home where the air wasn't thick with unspoken accusations, where dinner wasn't a minefield of lies and evasions. I wasn't going to give them that tonight. I wasn't going to give them anything but the same tired performance, the same fully constructed facade. But I was going to figure it out. I was going to find the truth, whatever it was, and then I was going to decide what to do with it. The clock on the microwave read 10:07. I forced myself to stand up, to clear the plates, to scrape the dried food into the trash. I moved through the kitchen on autopilot, washing the dishes, wiping the counters, putting the leftovers in containers I knew no one would eat. It was a ritual, a performance of normalcy that I'd perfected over the years. When I finally climbed the stairs, the bedroom was dark. Mark was already asleep, or pretending to be. I could see the outline of his body under the covers, his back turned toward my side of the bed. I changed into my pajamas in the dark, brushing my teeth in the bathroom with the door closed so the light wouldn't wake him. I lay down on my side of the bed, and I read at the ceiling. The room was so quiet I could hear him breathing, the slow steady rhythm of a man who had no trouble sleeping, who could close his eyes and let go of the day's anxieties without a second thought. I envied him that. I envied him his ability to check out, to retreat, to leave me alone with the mess he'd made. I thought about tomorrow. I would go to work. I would sit in my cubicle at Ryder Transport, and I would smile at my colleagues, and I would pretend that everything was fine. I would answer emails and attend meetings and do all the things a senior operations manager was supposed to do. And then I would come home, and I would do it all over again. But in between, I would figure it out. I would find the receipts, the statements, the evidence. I would follow the money, and I would follow the lies, and I would find the truth. And when I found it, I would decide what kind of woman I wanted to be, the kind who looked the other way, or the kind who walked away. I didn't have an answer yet. But I knew I wouldn't stop until I found one. The last thing I did before I closed my eyes was reach for my phone and send a single message to S.A. Ross number, "Thank you. I'll call again tomorrow." She didn't reply. I didn't expect her to. But the message was sent, a small anchor in a sea of uncertainty. I had a friend. I had a plan. And I had a resolve that was rooting to feel less like desperation and more like determination. I closed my eyes. The ceiling was still there when I opened them, but it didn't matter. I was going to sleep. I was going to rest, because tomorrow was coming, and I needed to be ready for it. The house settled around me, familiar and strange at the same time. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the furnace, the faint sound of Mia's music drifting from her room. These were the sounds of my life, the small details that made up the architecture of my days. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if I would find what I was looking for, or if finding it would destroy me. But I knew I couldn't keep living in the dark. I couldn't keep pretending that the foundation of my life was solid when I could feel it shifting beneath my feet. I took a breath. Another breath. And then I let the exhaustion take me, pulling me down into the gray space between waking and dreaming. The ceiling faded, and the sounds of the house grew distant, and I was falling into a sleep that held no peace but promised at least a temporary relief. Tomorrow, I would tomorrow, I would do something. Tonight, I just had to survive. The fluorescent lights of Ryder Transport buzzed overhead, the same hum I'd heard for 7 years, and I sat in my cubicle with a cup of coffee I'd forgotten to drink. The numbers on my screen blurred and refocused, a spreadsheet of shipping routes that I'd memorized months ago. My mind was elsewhere, floating back to the $5,000 RS in Mark's face when I'd confronted him. I had slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the text message from Chin. My desk phone rang, a shrill burst that made me flinch. Gerald's extension flashed on the display. I took a breath and lifted the receiver. Laura, my office. Now. Gerald's voice was clipped, the kind of tone that meant he was about to deliver news he expected me to be grateful for. I knew that voice. I'd heard it twice before, both times when he'd passed me over for a promotion and called me in to explain why it was actually for my own good. I walked to his office at the end of the hall, past the cubicles where my colleagues pretended not to watch. The glass walls gave me an unobstructed view of Gerald sitting behind his desk, a man whose thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him a professorial air that didn't match the sharpness in his eyes. He was 58, old enough to be my father, and he treated me like a promising student who kept making the same mistakes. "Sit down," he said, waving at the chair across from him. "Close the door." I closed the door and sat. The leather chair was cold, even through my slacks. I waited. Gerald leaned back, folding his hands over his stomach. "I've been reviewing your performance," he said. "The dispatch department is underperforming. We're losing time on deliveries, and the client complaints up 12% from last quarter. The complaints because Derek's team has been routing trucks inefficiently," I said. "I flagged that 2 months ago. He's sending empty trailers on return trips instead of backhauling." Gerald held up a hand. "I'm aware of your concerns about Derek. But he's been with us for 18 months, and he's shown a lot of promise. The issue here is staffing. You have too many people on the dispatch floor, and they're not being managed effectively." I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. I knew where this was going. "I want you to restructure the department," Gerald continued. "Streamline the team. Cut the dead weight. We need to be leaner, more efficient. I'm giving you a promotion to department head, but it comes with a condition." "What condition?" The Gable needs to go." The words landed like stones in my chest. Amayartha had been at Ryder for 11 years. She was 42, a single mother of 2 boys, and she knew the dispatch system better than anyone in the building. She was the one who'd trained me when I route here. She was the one who'd stayed late to help me close out the quarterly reports when I was drowning in paperwork. "She's the best dispatcher we have," I said. "Her numbers are consistently above average. Her error rate is practically 0. Gerald's eyes narrowed. She's also the highest paid dispatcher on the floor, and she's been here long enough to be set in her ways. She resists change. She's a drag on morale. The younger staff are intimidated by her. They're intimidated because she holds them accountable, I said. That's not a flaw. That's leadership. This isn't a debate, Laura. I'm giving you a chance to prove your management material. The promotion is yours if you take CA of this. If you can't make the hard decisions, then maybe you're not ready for the position. I looked at him. The fluorescent light above his desk cast shadows across his face, aging him by a decade. There was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite name. He wasn't just asking me to fire Amayarva. He was testing me, pushing me to see if I would push back. I thought about my conversation with Sa the night before. She told me to document everything, to keep track of the lies and the inconsistencies. I was rooting to see that Gerald was part of the same pattern. The promotion I'd been chasing for 3 years, the one he dangled in front of me like a CA rot, was never really mine to EARN. It was a tool, a leverage he could use to control me. I need to think about it, I said. This is a big decision. Gerald smiled, a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Take your time. But I need an answer by Friday. I left his office and walked back to my cubicle, my feet moving on autopilot. The floor was buzzing with the usual morning activity, phones ringing, keyboard RDS clacking, the low murmur of conversations that could have been about anything. I passed Derek's cubicle on the way. He was on the phone, laughing about something, and when he saw me, he gave a little wave. I didn't wave back. I just kept walking. The break room was empty at that hour, a small space with a coffee machine and a microwave and a refrigerator covered in magnets and faded notices. I poured myself a cup of water from the cooler and leaned against the counter, trying to slow my breathing. My hands were shaking again. I pressed them against the cold surface of the counter and forced myself to count to 10. That's when I heard Derek's voice in the hallway. He was talking to someone on the phone, his tone low and conspiratorial, and he wasn't paying attention to his surroundings. I heard my name. Laura Henderson. No, she's not going to get the promotion. Gerald's just stringing her along. She's too loyal to people like Amayarva. She doesn't understand how the game works. I froze. The break room door was slightly ajar, and I could see Derek's silhouette through the gap. He was standing near the water fountain, his back to me, his phone pressed to his ear. The deal's already done, he said. The client's happy with the arrangement. Gerald's getting his cut. I'm getting mine. Just keep the paperwork moving. No flags. My heart was pounding. I didn't move. If he turned around, if he saw me standing there, I didn't know what I would say. But he didn't turn. He just kept talking, his voice smooth and confident, the voice of a man who believed he was untouchable. I've got it handled, he said. The invoices are clean. Even if someone looked, they wouldn't find anything. Just make sure the payments go through on schedule. He ended the call and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hall. I waited a full minute before I stepped out of the break room, my mind racing. Invoices. Payments. A deal. Gerald's cut. Derek wasn't just sabotaging me. He was running a scheme, and Gerald was in on it. I went back to my cubicle and read at my computer screen, the spreadsheet of shipping routes still glowing in the dim light. I didn't see the numbers anymore. I saw something else entirely, a pattern I'd been too focused on the details to recognize. The invoices that had been flagged as errors, the clients who'd complained about overages, the mysterious discrepancies that had cost the company thousands of dollars and gotten half a dozen people fired. Amayarva was the one who'd discovered one of those discrepancies. She'd come to me 6 months ago with a stack of paperwork, pointing out that a client in the Midwest had been billed twice for the same shipment. I'd brought it to Gerald's attention, and he'd said he'd look into it. Nothing had happened. The discrepancy had been swept under the rug, and Emerda had been warned not to stir up trouble. Now Gerald wanted me to fire her. Now Derek was on the phone talking about invoices and payments. The pieces were rooting to come together, and the picture they formed was worse than I'd imagined. I spent the rest of the morning working on autopilot, answering emails and reviewing reports, my mind churning beneath the surface. At noon, I went to the cafeteria and bought a sandwich I didn't eat. I sat in the corner, watching the other employees, and I thought about what it meant to be a woman my age in a company like this. I was 34. I'd worked my way up from entry-level clerk to senior operations manager, and I'd done it by working harder and longer than anyone else. I'd skipped lunches, pulled all-nighters, missed my children's school plays and soccer games. And none of it had mattered. I was still a pawn in someone else's game. My phone buzzed with a text message from Mark. Can you pick up Mia from school? My meeting's running late. I read at the message for a long moment. He was using the same excuse he'd used last night, the same tired lie. I didn't have the energy to fight it. I just typed back, I'll get her. The afternoon dragged on. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to Mark and the text message and the $5,000 RS. I couldn't stop thinking about Chin. Who was she? What did she want? What had Mark told her about me? I was still thinking about it when I left the office at 5:30, my briefcase heavy with reports I'd need to review at home. The drive to Mia's school took 20 minutes, long enough for the anger to build again, long enough for me to rehearse all the things I wanted to say to Mark when I got home. Mia was waiting outside the school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She got into the car without saying a word, and I watched her in the rearview mirror as I pulled away from the curb. Her face was pale and tired, dark circles under her eyes that she tried to hide with her hair. How was school? I asked. Fine. Did you eat lunch? I wasn't hungry. I sighed. The conversation was going exactly as I'd expected, a series of short answers that revealed nothing. I'd hoped that by the time she was 12, we'd have found a rhythm, a way of talking to each other that didn't feel like pulling teeth. But we hadn't. I was too tired, and she was too old to be fooled by my attempts at connection. The argument with Mark root as soon as I walked through the door. He was in the kitchen, already home, sitting at the table with a glass of water and a look on his face that I recognized as guilt dressed up as concern. We need to talk, he said. I set down my briefcase and took off my jacket. About what? About the money. About everything. I know you've been upset, and I know I haven't been honest with you. I waited. I didn't sit down. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed, watching him squirm. The money is gone, he said. I lost it. I've been gambling. Small amounts at first, but it got out of hand. I tried to stop, but I couldn't. The words hung in the air, heavy and familiar. I'd suspected the gambling, but hearing him admit it was different. There was something almost worse about the confession, the way he made it sound like a disease he'd caught, something that had happened to him rather than something he'd chosen. How much? I asked. How much have you lost? He didn't meet my eyes. Total, maybe 12,000. But I stopped. I swear I stopped. I went to a meeting last week. Gamblers Anonymous. I was going to tell you. 12,000, I repeated. That's a year's worth of groceries. That's Leo's braces twice over. That's, I know, he said, his voice breaking. I know. I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you. I'll do whatever it takes. I believed him. Or I wanted to believe him. There was a part of me that still wanted to fix things, to put the pieces back together and pretend the cracks weren't there. But there was another part of me, a writer part, that remembered the text message from A. Chin and the way he'd lied about it. "Who is A. Chin?" I asked. He blinked. "What, the text message?" "Last night. From A. Chin." "Who is she?" He looked away, and I watched the color drain from his face. "She's someone from work," he said. "A colleague." "It was a work thing." "A work thing?" She said. "You had a meeting." She said I didn't suspect anything. "What was that about?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For a moment, I saw the truth in his eyes, the fear, the guilt, the desperation. And then he blinked, and it was gone, replaced by the same practiced calm he'd used 100 times before. "She was talking about the partnership," he said. "The Charlotte branch. She thought you might be suspicious about the hours I've been putting in." It was stupid. I shouldn't have let her send that message. I didn't believe him. I wanted to, but I didn't. The pieces didn't fit. The gambling explanation was too neat, too convenient. It explained the money, but it didn't explain the secret meetings and the coded messages and the way he'd been disappearing for hours at a time. But I was tired. I was so tired of fighting, of pushing, of trying to pry the truth out of a man who was determined to keep it from me. I nodded and said okay, and I let him hug me, and I told him we'd figure it out together. That night, after the kids were in bed and Mark had gone to sleep, I sat in the living room with my laptop. The tracking app I'd installed on his phone was still active, still sending me his location data. I opened the app and scrolled through the history. There were the usual places: work, the grocery store, the gym. But there were others, too. A restaurant on the edge of town, visited twice in the past week. An address in a neighborhood I didn't recognize, visited 3 times in the past month. I didn't know what was there, but I knew I needed to find out. I copied the address into my phone and closed the laptop. The house was quiet, the darkness pressing in around me. I lay down on the couch and read at the ceiling, the same ceiling I'd read at the night before, and I let myself feel the full weight of what I was facing. My marriage was falling apart. My career was a sham. The man I'd trusted with my life was lying to me, and the company I'd given 7 years to was run by a criminal. And yet, in the midst of it all, there was a small spark of something else. Something like resolve, like determination. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let Derek and Gerald take everything I'd worked for. I wasn't going to let Mark's lies destroy my family. I closed my eyes and made a promise to myself. I would find the truth. I would fight back. And I would come out of this with my head held high, no matter what it cost me. The address on my phone was burned into my memory. I knew I would be visiting it soon. I just didn't know what I would find when I got there. I spent the next morning at my desk with the address from Mark's phone burning a hole in my memory. I had to go there. I had to see what he was hiding. But first, I had to survive another day at Ryder Transport, another day of Gerald's hovering and Derek's smug smiles. Gerald called me into his office at 10. He asked if I'd made a decision about Martha. I told him I needed more time. He didn't look pleased. He told me Friday was still the deadline, and he reminded me that the promotion was contingent on my ability to make the hot RD calls. I nodded and said I understood. I didn't tell him that I was rooting to understand a lot of things I wished I didn't. I was walking back to my cubicle when Simon Appe read at my elbow. He was a quiet young man, maybe 27, with a mop of dark hair and glasses that were always slipping down his nose. He'd been my assistant for 2 years, a steady presence in a chaotic department, and I'd never once heard him raise his voice. But there was something in his face that day, a tightness around his mouth, that made me stop. "Laura," he said, his voice a relay above a whisper. I need to talk to you. Somewhere private. I glanced around. The floor was busy, phones ringing, printers humming, people moving between cubicles. The stairwell, I said. Meet me there in 5 minutes. He nodded and Giuseppe read. I waited a beat, then grabbed a stack of files and headed for the stairwell. The heavy metal door swung shut behind me, and the noise of the office faded to a distant hum. I leaned against the railing and waited. Simon Appe read a few minutes later, his face pale. He checked the door behind him, making sure it was closed. I found something, he said. Something I didn't know what to do with, so I came to you. Take your time, I said. Tell me what happened. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos. Last week, I was working late. I left around 8, and I took the back stairs to the parking lot. I saw Derek Car in the FAR corner, the one he usually parks in. There was another Car next to it, a black sedan. I saw Derek get out and talk to the driver. He turned his phone toward me. The photo was grainy, taken in low light, but I could see Derek's profile clearly. The other figure was half shrouded in shadow, but I recognized the build, the posture. It was a man I'd seen before, a client representative I'd met at a conference 6 months ago. This is the client from the Midwest deal, I said. The one we had the billing issue with. Simon nodded. I looked into it. The billing issue was never resolved. The client paid the overcharge, and the money Giuseppe read into a shell account. Derek's signature is on the paperwork, but Gerald approved it. I found copies of the invoices in the Shawred drive, the ones Amerva flagged 6 months ago. They're still active. They're still being paid. I read at the photo. The pieces were falling into place, a puzzle I'd been trying to solve for months. Derek and Gerald were running a scheme, siphoning money from the company through fake invoices and overcharges. Amerva had discovered it, and they were trying to get rid of her. I had been the tool they'd chosen for the job. Where did you find the invoices? I asked. In a folder labeled archived. It's in the main financial directory. I don't think anyone thought to delete them because the folder is so old. It's buried under years of data. Can you access it? He hesitated. I can. But if I get caught, I'll be fired. Maybe worse. Laura, this is serious. This is fraud. They could go to prison. I felt a cold calm settle over me. This was bigger than I'd thought. Bigger than a stolen promotion or a few $1,000s. This was a criminal enterprise, and I was standing in the middle of it. I need you to get me copies of those invoices, I said. Everything you can find. Don't access them from your work computer. Use a thumb drive. Do it after hours, and don't tell anyone what you're doing. Laura, are you sure about this? No, I said. But I don't have a choice. We part ways. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on the spreadsheets in front of me, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about Amerva, about the way she'd been treated, about the loyalty she'd shown me when I was new and struggling. She didn't deserve to be the sacrificial lamb in someone else's scheme. I couldn't let it happen. At lunch, I called Ra. I told her about the invoices, about Derek and Gerald, about the photo Simon had taken. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she let out a long breath. This is serious, Laura, she said. This isn't just domestic trouble. This is corporate fraud. You need to be careful. If they suspect you're onto them, they'll destroy you. I know, I said. I'm being careful. You because it sounds like you're about to do something reckless. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because she was right. I was about to do something reckless. But I didn't see another way. The address from Mark's phone was still on my mind. That afternoon, I left work early, telling Gerald I had a doctor's appointment. I drove to the neighborhood I'd found on the tracking app, a quiet street lined with modest houses and overgrown lawns. The address was a small house, peeling paint on the porch, a rusted mailbox leaning to one side. I parked across the street and waited. I didn't know what I was looking for. A sign of an affair. A gambling den. Something that would explain the $5,000 RS and the text messages and the RS of lies. After an hour, a woman came out of the house. She was middle-aged, perhaps 50, with gray-streaked hair and sensible shoes. She got into a sedan and drove away. I didn't follow her. I just sat there, watching the empty house, feeling the weight of my suspicion settle around me like a heavy coat. I didn't have an answer. I still didn't know what Mark was hiding. But I knew I wouldn't stop until I found out. That evening, I drove to the hospital to visit Mark's mother. Linda was in a private room, recovering from a routine procedure, and she brightened when I walked in. She was a WRM woman, the kind of mother-in-law people joked about but secretly wished they had. She'd never criticized me, never meddled in our marriage. She just accepted me as part of her family and loved me like her own daughter. "Laura," she said, reaching for my hand. "You didn't have to come. I know you're busy with work and the children." "It's no trouble," I said, sitting down in the chair beside her bed. "How are you feeling, old?" she said, laughing. "But they say the procedure went well. I'll be out of here in a few days. Have you eaten? The food here is terrible. I'll have Mark take you to that nice Italian place on Main. The one with the good bread." I smiled and nodded, and we talked about small things for a while. The weather. The children's school. The latest book she was reading. But I couldn't keep the questions at bay. They were simmering beneath the surface, waiting to break free. "Linda," I said finally, "can I ask you something about Mark?" She looked at me with those kind eyes, and I saw something flicker in them. Not surprise, not confusion, but something else. Something that looked like recognition. "What do you want to know?" she asked. "Did he ever have trouble with money before we were married?" The question hung in the air between us. Linda's hand tightened around mine, and I watched her face change, the warmth giving way to something sadder and older. "He didn't tell you," she said. It wasn't a question. "Tell me what." She let out a long sigh. When Mark was in his early 20s, he had a gambling problem. Small amounts at first, but it grew. He got into debt. Serious debt. He borrowed money from people he shouldn't have. I had to sell my mother's jewelry to pay off his creditors. I thought he'd stopped. I thought he'd grown out of it. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected the gambling, but it confirmed by his own mother was different. It made it real, made it permanent. "He's doing it again," I said. "I found withdrawals from our account. Thousands of dollars. He says he's stopped, but I don't believe him." Linda closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. "I'm sorry, Laura. I should have told you before you married him. I should have warned you. I thought he'd changed. He promised me he'd changed." "It's not your fault," I said. "It's not your responsibility." "It is, though," she said. "A mother knows her child." I knew he had weaknesses. I just hoped he'd overcome them. We sat in silence for a long moment. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A nurse passed in the hallway, her footsteps soft and rhythmic. I thought about the years I'd spent with Mark, the years I'd believed in him, the years I'd ignored the small signs that something was wrong. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "I needed to know." "BCA Riefel, Laura," Linda said. "He's not a bad man. But he's weak. And weak men do desperate things." I left the hospital with those words echoing in my mind. Weak men do desperate things. I didn't know what Mark had done, what he was capable of. But I knew I couldn't trust him anymore. The man I'd married was a stranger, a ghost. We ring his face up the next day at work. Simon Appe read at my desk with a thumb drive in his palm. "I got them," he said. "Everything. The invoices, the approval forms, the Shell account numbers. It's all here." I took the thumb drive and slipped it into my pocket. "Thank you," I said. "You did the right thing." He nodded, but his face was troubled. "Laura, BCA Riefel. If they find out you have this, they'll come after you. They already tried to transfer me to another branch. I turned it down, but they'll try again." "I know," I said. "But I won't let them win." That night, I stayed late at the office. The building was empty, the lights dim, the hum of the computers the only sound. I plugged the thumb drive into my laptop and sta root going through the files. There were dozens of them, spanning months of transactions, each one a piece of the puzzle. The Shell account was registered to a holding company in a state I'd never heard of. The payments were routed through 3 different banks before they read. It was a sophisticated scheme, one that someone with an understanding of the financial system had built. Derek wasn't smart enough to do this alone. Gerald was involved, pulling the strings from his glass-walled office. I made copies of everything. I emailed the files to SA Raw, encrypted, with a note explaining what I'd found. I deleted the originals from my computer and wiped the thumb drive. I left the office at midnight, my heart pounding, my mind racing. The parking lot was dark. I walked to my car, keys in hand, and I was about to unlock the door when I saw movement in my peripheral vision. A figure was standing near the corner of the building, half hidden in shadow. I froze. It was Derek. He was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "Late night, Laura," he said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "Working," I said. "Same as you, I assume." He pushed off the wall and walked toward me. I tensed, my hand tightening around my keys. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the stubble on his chin, the coldness in his eyes. "Simon's been talking to you," he said. "I saw him give you something. A thumb drive. Maybe I don't know what you're talking about." He laughed, a low, humorless sound. "You're not a good liar, Laura. You never have been. That's why you've been stuck in that cubicle for 7 years while people like me move up." He stepped closer. I stepped back, my back hitting the door of my car. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and in the darkness of the parking lot, he looked threatening in a way he never did in the office. "Give me the thumb drive," he said. "And I'll forget this ever happened. You can keep your job. You can keep your pathetic little marriage. You can go back to pretending you're in control of your life." "I don't have it," I said. "You're wrong. I saw him give it to you," he said. "Don't lie to me." I read at him. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. But I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. "I don't have it," I said again. "If you want to see me, go ahead. But you won't find anything." He studied me for a long moment. I could see him calculating, trying to decide whether to believe me. Finally, he stepped back. You're making a mistake, he said. You think you can fight this, but you can't. Gerald will make sure you never work in this industry again. He'll make sure your life is a living hell. And I'll be right there, watching. He turned and walked away. I watched him disappear into the darkness, his footsteps echoing in the empty parking lot. I fumbled for my car keys, my hands shaking, and I got into the car and locked the doors. I sat there for a long time, breathing hard, trying to slow my racing heart. Derek knew. He knew I had the evidence. And he just threatened me, in plain language, without any witnesses. I route the car and drove home. The streets were empty, the houses dark. I felt like I was driving through a ghost town, a city of shadows and secrets. My life had become a maze of lies and betrayals, and I was stumbling through it blind. When I got home, the house was quiet. Mark was asleep. The children were asleep. I stood in the kitchen, alone in the darkness, and I thought about the conversation I'd had with Linda at the hospital. Weak men do desperate things. I wasn't weak. I couldn't afford to be. I had to be strong, for my children, for myself. I had to fight back. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. I sent a text to Simon, "It's done. They know. BCA refill." He replied a minute later, "You too. I'll watch my back." I put the phone away and climbed the stairs. The bedroom was dark, and Mark was a still shape beneath the covers. I changed into my pajamas and lay down beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his body, far enough to feel the distance between us. Tomorrow, I would have to face Gerald. Tomorrow, I would have to defend myself. But tonight, I needed to rest. I needed to gather my strength. I closed my eyes and let the exhaustion pull me down. The house settled around me, creaking and humming, and I fell into a restless sleep, the weight of my secrets pressing down on me like a stone. The morning light was gray and thin when I woke, filtering through the blinds and streaks that fell across Mark's sleeping face. I watched him for a moment, the way his lips parted slightly, the way his hand lay open on the pillow like he was reaching for something in his dreams. I used to watch him sleep and feel a quiet contentment, a sense that whatever happened in the world outside, at least we had each other. Now I just felt a hollow ache. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen. The coffee maker was already set, the timer I'd programmed the night before clicking on at 6:15. I poured a cup and sat at the table, ring at the wall. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, "Got the files. Looking at them today. Stay safe." I typed back a quick reply and set the phone down. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that felt like waiting. Mark came downstairs an hour later, his hair still wet from the shower. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from me, not meeting my eyes. The silence between us was thick, heavy with things we weren't saying. "We need to talk," I said. "About the money." He sighed, rubbing his face with both hands. "Laura, I told you." I stopped. "I went to a meeting. I'm getting help. I need to know the truth," I said. "All of it. Not just the gambling. Everything." He looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years, real fear. Not the performative guilt he'd been wearing like a coat, but something deeper and more honest. "I'm in trouble," he said. "I owe money to people. Not a casino. Not a bookie. People who don't play nice. Who does it matter? It matters to me." He looked away. "A loan, RK. I borrowed $10,000 to cover a debt I had from a failed business venture. I thought I could pay it back quickly, but the interest kept piling up. Now I owe twice that. They've been calling. They've been threatening. I felt the blood drain from my face. Threatening, who you? The kids. They said they'd come to the house. They said they'd hurt you if I didn't pay. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the table. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me? Because I was ashamed, he said. Because I was trying to fix it myself. I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air between us. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream and throw things and demand to know how he could have been so stupid. But all I felt was a cold, creeping dread. The threat wasn't abstract anymore. It was real. It was aimed at my children. How much do you owe? I asked. 20,000. Maybe more. The interest is compounding. I closed my eyes. $20,000 RS. That was more than we had in savings. That was more than we could scrape together by selling furniture and cutting back on groceries. We were a middle-class family with a mortgage and CAR payments and 2 kids who needed braces and summer programs. We didn't have $20,000 RS sitting around. I'll figure it out, I said. I'll find a way. He reached across the table and took my hand. Laura, I'm so sorry. I never meant to drag you into this. I pulled my hand away. I know, I said. But we're in it now. And I need you to be honest with me. No more secrets. No more lies. If there's anything else, you need to tell me now. He shook his head. There's nothing else. I swear. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But the trust was gone, replaced by a cautious wariness that made every word he spoke feel like a test. I left for work that morning with a knot in my stomach. The drive to Ryder Transport was familiar. The same roads, the same traffic, the same billboard RDS I'd passed 1,000 times. But everything felt different. The world had shifted on its axis, and I was still trying to find my footing. The office was buzzing when I arrived. I walked to my cubicle, ignoring the looks my colleagues were giving me. Something was going on. I could feel it in the air, the tension that precedes a storm. Simon Appe read at my side, his face pale. Gerald called a meeting, he said. Department heads. 10 o'clock. He didn't say what it was about. I nodded. I'll be there. The meeting was in the conference room, the one with the long table and the white board covered in chalk RTS and numbers. Gerald was at the head of the table, his glasses perched on his nose, a stack of papers in front of him. Derek sat to his right, a smug smile playing on his lips. The other department heads were there, a dozen people I'd worked with for years, none of them meeting my eyes. Thank you all for coming, Gerald said. I've called this meeting to discuss some changes in the operations department. Laura, I've received some concerning reports about the dispatch team's performance. I've decided to conduct a formal review. I felt the room tilt slightly. A review of what of the department's financial practices. There have been allegations of irregularities in the billing process. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, but I have an obligation to investigate. I knew what he was doing. He was trying to preempt me. He heard from Derek that I had the evidence, and he was moving to discredit me before I could use it. Who made the allegations? I asked. An anonymous source, Gerald said smoothly. I'm sure you understand that I can't reveal their identity. I looked at Derek. He was still smiling, that same smug smile, and I wanted to reach across the table and wipe it off his face. But I didn't. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, and I forced myself to stay calm. I've already flagged those billing irregularities, I said. I brought them to your attention 6 months ago. Nothing was done. I'd be happy to share my documentation with the review team. Gerald's smile faltered. For just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or wariness. That won't be necessary, he said. The review will be handled internally. I'm sure everything will be clear. Read up quickly. The meeting ended. I walked back to my cubicle, my heart pounding. Simon was waiting for me. He's going to try to fire you, he said. He's building a case. I heard him talking to Derek. They're going to blame you for the discrepancies. They can try, I said. But I have the evidence. I have proof that they were the ones behind it. Laura, you can't use that evidence without exposing yourself. They'll say you stole it. They'll say you fabricated it. They'll destroy your career. I knew he was right. But I didn't have a choice. If I didn't fight back, I would lose everything. My job. My reputation. My ability to provide for my children. That afternoon, I called Sarah. I told her about the meeting, about Gerald's threat, about the loan shark and the $20,000 RS. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she let out a long breath. Laura, this is beyond what I can handle, she said. You need to hire a lawyer. A good one. Someone who specializes in corporate fraud. And you need to go to the police about the threats. You can't handle this alone. I know, I said. But I need time. I need to figure out who I can trust. Trust me, she said. I'll find you a lawyer. I have contacts. But Laura, you need to be careful. These people are dangerous. Gerald isn't just trying to protect his job. He's trying to protect his freedom. I hung up and sat at my desk, staring at the screen. The numbers were still there, the same spreadsheets I'd been working on for weeks. But none of it mattered anymore. None of it was real. The only thing that was real was the fight I was about to have. That evening, I drove to the address I'd saved from Mark's phone. The house was the same as before, peeling paint and a rusted mailbox. This time, I knocked on the door. A woman answered. She was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and a tired face. She looked at me with suspicion. Can I help you? She asked. I'm looking for the man who lives here, I said. The one who's been lending money to my husband. Her face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. No one lives here. I'm just the retaker. Please, I said. I need to talk to him. I need to work out a payment plan. I need to protect my family. She read at me for a long moment. Then she stepped back and let me inside. The house was sparse, almost empty. A table, a few chairs, a telephone on the wall. There was no furniture beyond the basics, no pictures on the walls, no signs of someone living there. It looked like a place where business was conducted, not a home. A man came out of the back room. He was tall, thin, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He wore a cheap suit and a gold watch that caught the light. You're Mark's wife, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. I want to pay off his debt. He laughed. You don't have that kind of money. I'll find it. But I need time. And I need you to stop threatening my family. He studied me for a long moment. I don't make threats, he said. I make promises. And my promises aren't cheap. I understand, I said. Give me a month. I'll have the money. A month, he repeated. You have until the end of the month. If you don't have the money by then, your husband will have to deal with the consequences. I nodded and turned to leave. My hands were shaking, but I didn't let him see. I walked out of the house and got into my car, and I drove away without looking back. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Mark. The children were in bed, the house was quiet, and we were alone with the weight of everything we'd been carrying. I talked to the loan shark, I said. I bought us a month. He read at me. Laura, that's insane. You can't just walk into a place like that. What if he hurt you? He didn't hurt me. He made a deal. We have a month to come up with $20,000 RS. We don't have $20,000 RS. I know, I said. But I have a plan. I told him about the evidence I'd gathered, about the fraud Derek and Gerald were running, about the possibility of a lawsuit or a settlement. I told him we could use the money to pay off the debt and start over. He listened, his face pale, his hands gripping the table. This is crazy, he said. You're talking about blackmail. I'm talking about survival, I said. I'm talking about protecting our children. He was silent for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took my hand. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I put you in this position. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to fix it myself. I looked at him, at the man I'd married, at the stranger he'd become. I didn't know if we would survive this. I didn't know if our marriage would survive this. But I knew one thing for sure. I was going to fight. I was going to fight for my children, for my home, for my life. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The letter came on a Tuesday, delivered by certified mail in a stiff envelope that felt like an accusation. I opened it in the kitchen, my hand steady even as my heart raced. It was a cease and desist order from Ryder Transport's legal department, informing me that I was being suspended with pay pending an investigation into financial irregularities within the dispatch department. They wanted my computer password, my building access card, and my cooperation with their inquiry. I read the letter 3 times. The words didn't change. They had cut me off at the knees, frozen me out of the company I'd given 7 years of my life to. There was no mention of Derek or Gerald, no acknowledgement that the irregularities were their doing. The letter was legal, designed to make me look guilty without actually saying it. I called SA Raw. She listened, asked a few questions, and then told me not to respond to anything without consulting a lawyer. She gave me the name of a corporate attorney she knew, a woman named Patricia Morales who specialized in whistleblower cases. I called Patricia that afternoon, and she agreed to take my case on contingency. They're trying to discredit you, Patricia said. They're building a case to fire you for cause so they don't have to pay severance or face a wrongful termination lawsuit. Don't give them anything. Don't talk to anyone at the company. Refer all communications to me. I agreed, but the isolation was immediate and crushing. My colleagues, people I'd worked alongside for years, suddenly wouldn't meet my eyes. The few who did looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion, like I was a patient in a hospital ward for the terminally guilty. I stopped going to the office. There was no point. I was a ghost there, haunting the halls of a place that had already moved on without me. The suspension gave me time, too much time. Time to think about the $20,000 RS I owed, the loan shark who had my family in his sights, the marriage that was crumbling around me like a building in an earthquake. I spent my days at home, cleaning the house, king meals no one ate, ring at the walls. My mind was a constant loop of worry and dread, a broken record that played the same RS over and over. Mark was distant. He'd been distant for months, but now the distance felt like a canyon. He came home late, left early, spent his weekends on his phone or in front of the television. We talked about logistics, about money, about the children, but we didn't talk about us. We didn't talk about the loan shark or the threats or the way our lives had spiraled into chaos. We were two people sharing a house, not a life. The children noticed. Mia had become quiet, withdrawn, spending hours in her room with her headphones on. Leo had stopped doing his homework, his grades slipping from BS to CS to DS. I tried to talk to them, to reach through the walls they built, but every attempt felt like a failure. I was their mother, and I couldn't protect them from the storm that was coming. Linda called from the hospital, her voice weak but determined. She'd been discharged and was recovering at home, and she wanted to see the children. I drove them to her house on Saturday, a small ranch on the outskirts of town with a garden that had gone wild. She was in a wheelchair, her legs still healing, but her eyes were sharp and watchful. "How are you doing?" she asked, after the children had gone to the backyard to play. "I'm hanging on," I said. Rely. She nodded. Mark told me about the suspension. He told me about the money. "I'm sorry, Laura. I'm sorry my son has put you through this." "It's not your fault," I said. "It's not your responsibility." "Maybe not," she said. "But I raised him. I should have done a better job." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the children were chasing each other around the garden, their laughter a distant echo of the joy that had once filled my house. "Have you thought about leaving him?" Linda asked. The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. I hadn't thought about leaving him. I'd thought about everything else, the money, the threats, the job, but I hadn't allowed myself to think about that. It was too final, too permanent. "Sometimes," I said finally. "But I don't know if I can. The children need a father. They need stability. The children need a mother who isn't drowning," she said. "They need a home that isn't full of fear. If you stay, you're teaching them that this is what marriage looks like. Is that what you want them to learn?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Mark was beside me, his breathing slow and rhythmic. I listened to him sleep, and I thought about everything Linda had said. She was right. I was teaching my children that lies and secrets were normal, that fear and debt were just part of life. I was teaching them to accept the unacceptable. I made a decision. I wouldn't stay in this marriage because I felt trapped. I would stay if I chose to stay, if Mark chose to change. But the decision wasn't urgent. The loan shark was urgent. The money was urgent. The fight with Gerald and Derek was urgent. The next morning, I drove to the office to meet with Patricia at a coffee shop near our Ryder Transport. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and glasses perched on her nose. She had the files I'd given her spread out on the table, notes scrawled in the margins. "The evidence is solid," she said. "The invoices, the shell account, the photo of Derek with the client. It's enough to build a case, but there's a problem." "What's the problem?" "You obtained the evidence by accessing company files without authorization. Gerald's lawyers will argue that you stole it. They'll try to get it suppressed. We need a different approach." Like what she leaned forward. "We go to the client. We show them the invoices and prove they were overcharged. They'll sue Ryder Transport, and Gerald and Derek will be caught in the middle. It's risky, but it might be the only way." I thought about it. The client was a major company, one that had been doing business with Ryder for years. If they found out they'd been defrauded, they'd want blood. But they'd also want to keep it quiet, to avoid the public harassment. It was a double-edged sword. "Do it," I said. "I'll give you all the documentation you need." Patricia nodded. I'll make some calls. But Laura, you need to understand something. Once we do this, there's no going back. Gerald will come after you with everything he has. You need to be prepper red for that. I'm prepper red, I said. I've been prepper red for months. But I wasn't prepper red. Not really. Because when Gerald's lawyers filed a motion to suppress my evidence, and when the client's legal team sta route asking questions, and when the news of the fraud investigation leaked to the local press, I found myself in a storm I'd never anticipated. The story was everywhere, a feeding frenzy that consumed everything in its path. The worst part was the way it affected my family. Mia came home from school one day with tears streaming down her face. Her friend's parents had been talking, gossiping about the scandal at Ryder Transport. Her best friend had asked if her mother was going to jail. Mia asked. Is Daddy going to jail? I knelt down and took her in my arms. No, sweet art. No one is going to jail. It's just a misunderstanding. Everything is going to be okay. But I didn't believe it. I didn't know if anything would ever be okay again. Mark came home that night with a look I'd never seen on his face before. Something between terror and resignation. We need to talk, he said. I followed him into the living room. He sat down on the couch, his hands trembling. The loan shark called, he said. He's giving us an ultimatum. We have 3 days to come up with the money, or he's coming to the house. I felt the air leave my lungs. 3 days, but we don't have the money. We don't have anything. I know, he said. That's why I think we should leave. Just for a while. Maybe move in with my mother. Or drive somewhere far away. We can't stay here. It's not safe. I read at him. Leaving. That was his solution. Not fighting. Not confronting. Just running away. No, I said. I'm not running. I'm not letting him terrorize us out of our home. I'll find the money. I'll figure something out. Laura, there is no money. We've been through this. Our savings are gone. Our credit cards are maxed out. We can't borrow from family. We can't get a loan. There's nothing left. There's always something, I said. I'll find it. The argument that followed was the worst we'd ever had. Years of resentment poured out like water from a broken dam. I accused him of ruining our lives. He accused me of being controlling, of never trusting him, of making him feel small. We screamed at each other in the living room, our voices echoing off the walls, until Mia read in the doorway. Stop it, she said. Her voice was quiet, trembling, but there was steel underneath it. Just stop it. Both of you. I turned to look at my daughter. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in a single day. We're sorry, I said. We're sorry, baby. We didn't mean to fight. She said. You're always fighting. You've been fighting for years. I'm not a baby. I'm not stupid. I know what's happening. I didn't know what to say. There was nothing to say. She was right. We'd been fighting for years, hiding it behind closed doors and forced smiles. And she'd seen it all. I just want it to stop, she said. I want everything to stop. She turned and ran back to her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood in the living room, frozen, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Mark was beside me, his face a mask of guilt and shame. She's right, I said. We've been fighting for years. We've been pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. We've been lying to each other, lying to the children. We've been destroying this family. I know, he said. I know, Laura. But what do we do? How do we fix this? I didn't have an answer. The damage was too deep, the wounds too raw. We'd spent years ignoring the cracks in our foundation, and now the whole structure was collapsing. That night, I went to Mia's room. She was sitting on her bed, her knees pulled up to her chest. I sat down beside her. I'm sorry, I said. I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry for everything. She didn't respond. She just read at the wall, her face blank. Your father and I have made mistakes, I said. A lot of mistakes. But we love you. We love Leo. We're going to figure this out. I promise. She looked at me, her eyes harrowed. You keep making promises, Mom. You keep promising things you can't keep. I don't believe you anymore. The words cut deeper than any accusation Gerald had ever made. I sat there, helpless, watching my daughter slip away from me. I stayed in her room until she fell asleep, her breathing evening out into something that looked like peace. Then I went downstairs and sat in the dark kitchen, alone with my thoughts. The lone Shark was coming. Gerald was coming. My mariage was coming apart at the seams. And I had nothing left to fight with except the stubborn belief that things could be different. I thought about Linda's words. I thought about Mia's face, hard and unforgiving. I thought about the life I'd built, the life I'd believed in, and I realized that I'd been fooling myself. The life I'd built was a house of cards, and the wind was finally blowing it down. But I wasn't going to let it fall without a fight. I was going to rebuild it, brick by brick, even if it meant rooting from nothing. Even if it meant doing it alone. I got up from the table and went to the study. I pulled out my laptop and root typing. A list of everything I needed to do. A plan for the weeks ahead. It was a small thing, a tiny act of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. But it was something. And I held on to that something like a lifeline, hoping it would be enough to pull me through. The house was quiet when I woke the next morning, the kind of heavy silence that settles after a storm. I lay in bed for a long moment, ring at the ceiling, running through the list I'd made the night before. There was no time for despair. There was only action. I drove to Patricia's office that morning with a folder full of documents under my arm. The evidence was all there, the invoices, the Shell account, the photo Simon had taken, my own notes from months of tracking Gerald and Derek's schemes. Patricia spread them across her desk and studied them with the careful eye of a woman who had seen too many cases collapse because of a single missing detail. We can make this work, she said finally. But we need to be strategic. We don't confront them directly. We let the evidence speak for itself. How she leaned back in her chair. I've been in touch with the client's legal team. They're very interested in the Overche ridges. If we give them enough documentation, they'll launch their own investigation. They'll have no choice, they have Shari holders to answer to. Once they start digging, Gerald and Derek won't be able to hide. And what about me? What happens to me? Once the client files suit, Ryder Transport will have to distance themselves from Gerald. They'll have to settle with you to avoid a public scandal. You'll get your severance, your reputation back, and a non-disclosure agreement that will let you move on with your life. It sounded too simple, too clean. I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Nothing ever was. Let's do it, I said. Let's send the documents. Patricia nodded and made a call. I watched her work, her voice calm and professional, and I felt a small flicker of hope. It was fragile, but it was there. The next few days were a blur of waiting. I stayed at home, cleaning, trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy for the children. Mark was distant, withdrawn, spending his evenings in the garage with the door closed. I didn't ask what he was doing. I didn't want to know. Mia had stopped talking to me. She came home from school, ate dinner in silence, retreated to her room. Leo was even worse, his grades slipping further, his teachers calling with concerns I couldn't address because I had no energy left for anything but survival. The call came on Friday afternoon. Patricia's voice was tight with behavioral contained excitement. It worked. The client filed suit this morning. Ryder Transport is in crisis mode. Gerald and Derek have been suspended pending the investigation. The BOA RD is meeting to discuss the situation. I felt a rush of relief so intense it made me dizzy. What happens now? The BOA RD will want to settle with you. They'll make an offer. Don't accept anything without talking to me first. And Laura, BCA refill. Gerald isn't going to go quietly. He's going to try to take you down with him. I hung up and sat in the kitchen, STA ring at the phone. It was working. The plan was working. But Patricia's warning echoed in my mind. Gerald wasn't going to go quietly. He called me that night. His voice was hoa RSE, ragged, stripped of the condescending calm he usually wore like a Romer. You think you've won, he said. You think you're going to walk away from this with a check and a smile. But you're wrong. I'll destroy you. I'll make sure everyone knows you're a thief and a liar. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. I listened without responding. There was nothing to say. He was a cornered animal, lashing out in desperation. I let him talk, let him exhaust himself, and then I hung up. The next morning, I went to Ryder Transport to clean out my desk. The building was eerily quiet, the usual buzz of activity replaced by a tense, watchful silence. My colleagues looked away as I walked past, their faces fully blank. I was a pariah, a ghost, a reminder of the scandal that had rocked the company. I packed my personal items into a Boe Road box, a photo of the children, a small plant that had somehow survived 7 years of neglect, a coffee mug with a crack in the rim. I ride the box to my car and drove away without looking back. The news broke that afternoon. Gerald and Derek were formally charged with fraud. The local paper ran the story on the front page, complete with mugshots and a detailed account of the scheme. I read it at the kitchen table, my hands trembling, and I felt a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow. I'd won. But the victory felt hollow, like a prize I'd paid too much for. Mark came home early. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, his face unreadable. I saw the news, he said. I nodded. It's over. They're going to prison. What about you? What happens now? I settle with the company. I get my severance. I move on. He crossed the room and sat down across from me. For the first time in weeks, he looked at me like I was his wife, not a stranger. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry for everything. I should have been stronger. I should have protected you. I looked at him, at the man I'd married, and I realized that I didn't know him anymore. The love was still there, buried beneath layers of betrayal and disappointment, but it was like a photograph faded by time. I could see the shape of it, the memory of it, but the color was gone. We need to sell the house, I said. We need to pay off the debt. We need to start over. He nodded. I know. I'll make the calls. That night, we sat down with the children and told them we were moving. Mia cried. Leo read at the floor. They didn't ask why. They already knew. I route packing that weekend. Box after box of things we'd accumulated over 14 years of mariage. Dishes, books, clothes, toys. Each item felt like a weight, a reminder of a life we were leaving behind. The moving truck came on a Tuesday. The neighbors watched from their windows as we loaded our belongings onto the truck. Mark's mother, Linda, had recovered enough to help. She stood in the empty living room, her hand on my shoulder. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "I'm sure," I said. "It's the only way." She nodded. "You're strong, Laura. Stronger than you know." I hugged her, and for a moment, I felt like I was holding on to the last piece of my old life. Then I let go and walked out the door. We drove away in silence. The children were in the back seat, their faces pale and tired. Mark was beside me, his hands on the wheel. The house de Sape read in the rearview mirror, and I didn't look back. We arrived at our new home that evening. It was a duplex on the outskirts of a smaller city, 200 miles from everything we'd known. The rent was affordable, the neighborhood quiet, the schools decent. It wasn't the life I dreamed of, but it was a life I could survive. The next day, I route looking for work. It was humbling, sending out resumes with a gap in my employment history and a scandal attached to my name. But I kept at it, day after day, until a hot RDWA store on Main Street called me in for an interview. The owner was a woman in her 50s named Diane. She had a warm smile and a practical manner. She asked about my experience, and I told her the truth. Not all of it, not the RTS that would make her run in the other direction, but enough to give her a sense of who I was. "You're overqualified," she said. "But I like you. Can you start Monday?" I route Monday. The work was simple: inventory, scheduling, customer service. It was a long way from senior operations manager, but it was honest work, and it paid the bills. Mark found a job at a CAR dealership, selling used CARs to people who couldn't afford new ones. He came home tired and deflated, but he came home. He was present in a way he hadn't been in yet. The children adjusted slowly. Mia made a friend in her new school, a quiet girl named Emma who read her love of art. Leo joined the soccer team and found a group of boys who didn't care about his grades. They were healing, slowly, in their own ways. The money was tight. We ate pasta 3 times a week, packed leftovers for lunch, cut coupons from the newspaper. But the bills were paid, and the loan Mark was gone, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. One evening, Mark and I sat on the porch of the duplex, watching the sunset over the neighbor's fence. It was a small thing, a simple thing, but it felt like a victory. "I'm sorry," he said. "For everything." "I know I've said it before, but I mean it this time." I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. The love was still there, buried beneath layers of pain and disappointment. But I wasn't sure if it was enough. "We've been through a lot," I said finally. "We've made a lot of mistakes. I don't know if we can fix everything. But I want to try." He took my hand. "I want to try too." It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't a happy ending. It was just 2 people, broken and tired, deciding to keep going. The days passed. The weeks passed. I settled into a routine, a rhythm that was different from the chaos of before. The hot RDWA restore was predictable, the customers familiar, the work satisfying in its simplicity. I route to feel like myself again, a version of myself that had been buried under years of pretending. The final chapter of the Gerald and Derek story came a few months later. They were convicted, sentenced to prison terms, their careers destroyed. I didn't celebrate. I just felt a quiet relief, a sense that justice had been done. Patricia called to tell me the settlement was finalized. The check was enough to pay off the remaining debt and put a small amount aside for the children's college funds. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "Live," I said. "Just live." I hung up and looked out the window. The sky was gray, the clouds heavy with rain. But there was a break in the clouds, a sliver of sunlight, and for a moment, everything felt possible. I thought about the life I'd left behind, the house, the job, the illusions I'd clung to for so long. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed in happy endings and fairy tales. She was gone now, replaced by someone older, wiser, harder. But that woman was still me. And I was still here. And that was enough. I went back to work the next day, and I kept going. One day at a time, one step at a time. It wasn't the dream I'd had. But it was real. And that was better. A year had passed since we left the old house. The calendar on the kitchen wall showed a Tuesday in late August, and the garden outside was bursting with tomatoes and basil that I'd planted in the spring. The duplex was small, but it was ours. The rent was paid, the fridge was full, and the children had stopped looking at me like I was a stranger. I woke early that morning, as I always did, and made coffee. The kitchen was quiet, the light soft and gray through the window. I sat at the table with my cup and watched the garden, the way the leaves caught the morning dew. It was a simple thing, but it had become my ritual. A moment of peace before the day began. Mark came down an hour later. He poured himself a cup and sat across from me, his face tired but not haunted the way it used to be. He'd been working at the dealership for 11 months now, selling cars to people who didn't have much to spend. He didn't love the job, but he didn't hate it. He came home at 6, ate dinner with the family, and spent his weekends fixing things around the duplex. He was present. He was trying. Linda was visiting that weekend. She had recovered well from her surgery and had stayed traveling again, taking short trips to see family and friends. She arrived on Friday evening, her suitcase small and her smile warm. She hugged the children and kissed Mark on the cheek and sat down at the kitchen table like she'd always been there. I love what you've done with the place, she said, looking around at the modest space. It feels like a home. It is a home, I said. It just took us a while to find it. She nodded, and I knew she understood. Linda had always understood. She was the kind of woman who saw the truth beneath the surface, who knew when to push and when to stay silent. The weekend passed in a blur of small activities. We went to the farmers market on Saturday morning, the children running ahead while Mark and I walked side by side. We bought fresh bread and cheese and a bundle of sunflowers that I put in a jar on the counter. In the afternoon, we played board games in the living room, the same games we'd played in the old house, but somehow they felt different now. Lighter. On Sunday, Linda pulled me aside while Mark was grilling burgers in the backyard. She took my hand and led me to the porch, where we sat in the old rocking chairs I'd found at a garage sale. Tell me how you're really doing, she said. Not the polite answer. The real one. I looked at her, at the kind eyes that had seen so much, and I let myself be honest. I'm tired, I said. Every day, I wake up tired. But it's not the same tiredness as before. Before, I was exhausted from pretending. Now I'm just living. It's hard, but it's real. That's a good thing, she said. Being real is harder than pretending, but it's worth it. I nodded. I don't know if Mark and I will make it. We're trying, but there's so much damage. Sometimes I look at him and I still see the lies. I still feel the betrayal. She was quiet for a moment. You don't have to forgive him overnight. You don't have to forgive him at all. But if you want to stay, if you want to try, you have to let go of the past. Not forget it, but let it stop controlling you. I thought about her words as I watched the children run through the backyard. They were laughing, their faces bright and free in a way they hadn't been for months. Mia had stayed drawing again, filling sketchbooks with portraits of her friends and landscapes of the new city. Leo had made the soccer team and was talking about trying out for a travel league next year. They were healing. They were growing. The call came on Monday morning. Mark had already left for work, and the children were at school. I was in the GA den, pulling weeds, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. It was the old company. The new C, a woman who had been brought in to clean up the mess Gerald had left behind. She was polite, professional, and she had an offer for me. A consulting position, part-time, with the option to move back to a full-time role if I chose. The salary was good. The benefits were good. It was everything I'd wanted before everything fell apart. I listened, and I said I'd think about it. That evening, I told Mark. He was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, and I stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment. He had a new rhythm, a new way of moving through the world. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something. The company called, I said. They want me to come back. Consulting, part-time. It's a good offer. He stopped chopping. His hands hovered over the cutting board, and I watched his face change. Surprise, then something that looked like fear, and then a real neutrality that I knew was hiding something deeper. What are you going to do? He asked. I haven't decided yet. He turned to face me. Laura, I don't want to tell you what to do. But I have to say something. If you go back there, you're going back to everything that nearly destroyed you. The stress, the politics, the expectations. You worked so hard to get out. I don't want to see you get pulled back in. You're worried about me. Of course I'm worried about you. You're my wife. I know I haven't been good at showing it, but I see about you. I see about what happens to you. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. A willingness to let him see me, to let him in. I'm worried too, I said. I don't know if I want to go back to that world. I don't know if I can. But I also don't know if I can stay here forever, working at a hardware store, pretending that's enough. It is enough, he said. It's more than enough. We have enough. We have a home, we have the kids, we have each other. What more do we need? I didn't have an answer. I just stood there, looking at him, and I realized that he was right. The life we had was small, but it was ours. It was real. I told the new C no. It was a polite conversation, a brief exchange of regrets and well wishes. When I hung up, I felt a sense of relief that I hadn't expected. The door was closed. I'd chosen to stay. The next few months were a quiet kind of peace. I stayed at the hardware store, working alongside Diane, learning the rhythms of a simpler life. The regular customers became familiar faces. The morning deliveries became a routine. I wasn't changing the world, but I was making a difference in small ways, and that was enough. Mark and I root having dinner together again. Real dinners, not the hurried meals we'd eaten in the old house. We talked about the children, about work, about the small things that made up our days. It wasn't always easy. There were silences that felt like walls, and arguments that read up over nothing. But we kept trying, and that was what mattered. Mia had a school art show in the spring. She invited us, and we went, sitting in the back of the gymnasium while she stood nervously beside her easel. Her painting was a landscape, a hillside covered in wildflowers, the sky streaked with pink and orange. It was beautiful, and I felt a swell of pride so intense it almost hurt. Leo came home one afternoon and announced he'd made the travel soccer team. He was beaming, his face flushed with excitement, and I hugged him so hard he complained. He was 13 now, taller than me, his voice sta rooting to deepen. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was becoming a man. The summer came, hot and lazy. We spent weekends at the community pool, packed picnics in the parque, watched movies on the couch with a big bowl of popcorn. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was a life I could love. Linda visited again in July. She was healthier than she'd been in years, her color good, her spirit bright. She helped me in the garden, pulling weeds and watering the tomatoes. We talked about everything and nothing, the easy conversation of two women who had been through the fire and come out the other side. He's different, she said one afternoon, sitting on the porch with a glass of lemonade. Mark, I mean. He's not the same man who left that house. I know, I said. He's trying. We both agree. Good, she said. That's all you can ask for. That fall, Mark got a promotion. Not a big one, just a small step up at the dealership. He came home and told me with a grin that made him look like the young man I'd married. We went out to dinner to celebrate, a cheap Italian place with red checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. It was simple, but it was perfect. On the way home, Mark pulled the car over. He turned to me, his face serious. I know I've said this 100 times, he said. But I want you to know that I'm grateful. For everything. For staying, for giving me another chance. I know I don't deserve it. I didn't stay for you, I said. I stayed for me. For the kids. For the life we built. I know, he said. But I'm still grateful. We sat in the car for a long moment, the engine idling, the streetlights casting soft pools of light on the pavement. Then Mark sta root the car and drove home, and I looked out the window at the houses we passed, each one a story, each one a life. We hosted Thanksgiving that year. Linda came, and a few neighbors from the duplex. We cut a turkey, made mashed potatoes and green bean casserole and pumpkin pie from a recipe I'd found online. The table was too small, the chairs mismatched, but the house was full of laughter and the smell of good food. After dinner, I stood in the kitchen, washing dishes. Mark came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. A connection, a reminder that we were still here, still together. Thank you, he said. For all of this. I turned around and looked at him. The face I'd known for so long, the man who had hurt me and betrayed me and broken my trust. But also the man who was trying, day by day, to make things right. We're not done yet, I said. We still have work to do. I know, he said. But we're doing it. Together. I leaned my head against his chest and closed my eyes. The kitchen was warm, the laughter of my children echoing from the living room. The life I had wasn't the one I'd planned, but it was mine. It was real. And that was enough. The next morning, I woke early and went to the kitchen. The sun was rising, the sky pale and gold. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, looking out at the garden. The tomatoes had been picked, the basil dried and stored. The garden was empty now, waiting for winter, waiting for spring. I thought about the journey I'd been on. The lies and betrayals, the fights and reconciliations. The house I'd left behind, the life I'd rebuilt. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed in happy endings and fairy tales. She was gone, replaced by someone brighter and wiser. But she was still me, and I was still here. Mark came down the stairs, his hair mussed, his eyes still heavy with sleep. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from me. Morning, he said. Morning. We sat in silence, watching the sun rise. The children were still asleep, the house quiet. It was a moment of peace, a moment of grace. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if we would make it, if the mariage would survive, if the children would be okay. I didn't know if the peace I'd found would last. But I knew one thing. I was here. I was present. I was living, not just surviving. This was not the dream I'd had. It was better. It was real.